The study of genealogy mainly relies on the surname in order to follow a family line. But in the United Kingdom at least, the hereditary surname that is passed from generation to generation has only really existed since the Norman conquest. Before the Norman invasion in 1066, surnames did not really exist. A person might be identified by where he came from or what he looked like, so he might be known as Edmund of the Red Hair or Godric from over the hill. So unless you are lucky enough to trace your family back to nobility, it is impossible for the vast majority of people to trace a family history beyond this point. In this scene from the Bayeux Tapestry, you can see some of the Norman invaders, including William, Duke of Normandy. Many of these noblemen who accompanied William the Conqueror were identified by their place of origin, such as Robert de Beaumont or William de Warenne. Some of these names have lasted through time, and the or of was dropped over time, leaving the surname of, for example, Beaumont or Warren. So these were really the first kinds of surname that became hereditary. But the fashion for hereditary surnames, which had begun in the top ranks of society, very gradually filtered down through all levels of society. But it was not until the Middle Ages that surnames had become generally adopted by everyone. So let's take a look at the 5 different sources of surname. First of all, the most common origin of a surname is the place name. We have this with the Norman barons that I just mentioned in the last slide. Very often a surname can be recognised as being the name of a town or village or even a country. So surnames such as York or French would mean that an ancestor came from the city of York, or perhaps from France. They were not always to do with specific place names. Other surnames such as Hill or Wood can describe the type of place a distant ancestor came from. So, for example, perhaps a person was identified as being Ralph who lives in the wood, which eventually became just Ralph Wood. Does your surname fit into this category? If you are unsure, then it might be worth doing a search to see if there is a village or town in the UK that is the same as your name. The second most common form of surname is the occupational surname. Sometimes this kind of name is the most obvious. If you have a surname like Baker or Farmer, then it is very likely that your ancestors are involved in baking or agriculture. However, these kinds of names are not always that obvious because many old occupations have vanished into obscurity. The name Dexter, for example, comes from an old word for a dyer, and the surname Lavender, like the herb, comes from an old French word for washing, and so the occupation would be someone who washed clothes or linen for a living. If your name ends with the suffix son, then this indicates that one of your ancestors was named after his father. For example, Robertson means son of Robert, or Robert's son. This can also be the case with names that end with an S, such as Jones, where the last letters have been dropped. Much less likely, but occasionally it is the mother that has been remembered, as in the name Annis from Agnes or Mudd from Maud. The relationship type of surname is extremely common in Wales, where the prefix ap meant son of. So once upon a time, someone may have been called, for example, David ap Hugh, or David, son of Hugh. However, over time, this prefix became merged with the second name and lost the A, so the surname Pugh was once ap Hugh. Similarly, the more common name of Price, or its variation Preece, was once ap Rees. Another type of surname is the nickname, derived from the physical or personal characteristics of the original person. So names such as Redhead or Armstrong fit into this category. A less obvious one is the name Crookshank, which was an old term meaning crooked leg or lame. Common surnames such as Long or Short also fall into this category, but also names such as Good or Gay, in its original meaning of happy. Last and least common origin is that of an animal or plant. However, this category is also linked with the nickname origin, as the name of an animal such as Bull could denote a characteristic, and a plant name surname such as Quince could mean that this was the favourite fruit of a distant ancestor, or perhaps grew it in his garden or fields.